Okay, server monitoring and backup. A good portion will be spent in monitoring things that you have already seen and interacted with before. So this will be more review. For example, monitoring events. Well, you can live right off the land by using Event Viewer, or you could use a tool like Splunk to manage your logs. I prefer to use Splunk. To me, it works better to search through than this, but if you don't have Splunk, you can live right off the land with Event Viewer. You can create tasks within events to watch for if it happens again. For example, it can display you a message or send you an email and that kind of stuff, which any SIEM can do as well. And you know the various types of logs that already show up by default and what you can see in them. You can create custom views if you want. You can also forward events if you'd like, using Windows, the forward event log. Outside of logs, you can see what's going on with the task manager, which you have interacted with quite often. You have your process monitoring, your memory monitoring, your disk and network. Again, this is a kind of review. It's the same exact stuff that you'd see in Windows 10, giving you your CPU usage and the chart. Same for memory, same for Ethernet. Now it'll tell you how many users are logged on to your system and any processes that are running on the server. If you have multiple people connected to one box, it can do that for you. Of course, there's services that will tell you what services are running and stopped. You can use the resource monitor to see all these kinds of things as well, which is the much more in-depth version of the task manager. It's all the same as Windows 10, since a lot of it is just shared code, since it's using the same kernel, the same foundation. So the same information you would get out of desktop, you can get out of server. Like in the memory tab, getting what process is using what sections, all of the same things. Your disk usage, all the same things that you would get in desktop, you can also get here, including network and what connections are open, all this kind of stuff. The performance monitor works just the same. There we go. Adding counters to see what's happening and create a chart or information over a sluggish performance. Definitely use performance monitor for that. You can schedule data to get collected. You say how long you want to capture traffic for. Create those performance alerts when something falls below or above a certain threshold, like a disk counter when disk is getting read or written too much, or memory counters, processor, network. So you can keep, by using tools that are already built in, you can create those alerts when certain activity goes out of your baseline. Backing up is pretty similar to the desktop with a couple of changes. There are special services like Active Directory and Hyper-V that are dealt with differently than any other of the services and roles that exist. So of course, you should always have a server backup, even if it's on the cloud. Just because you don't manage the physical infrastructure doesn't mean you should ignore backups. You can add the role feature in the wizard or use PowerShell to install Windows backup. And that's what it'll look like. You can set up permissions as to who can manage backups, who can manage the backups, who can restore files, who can shut down the system. There's already a default group called the backup operators. So a user can be given that role and now they can handle backups. You can do a full backup or a custom, like bare metal, which will do your critical volumes, your system state. That'll hand up the boot files, the Windows system and registry, the system reserved, that system partition that normally is inaccessible, and in the individual volumes. It's always good, a good best practice to have your backups happen when nobody is using the systems or there is the least amount of traffic. And always test them. Don't always assume that your backups work right off the bat. Oh, I see your question. Does Windows Server 2019 still use the Windows 7 backup and restore to make system images that restore with the Windows installer? I'm pretty sure they do. Because it's Windows and they like to just keep reusing stuff over and over. So I don't see why not. Here's that wizard where you would specify the time. You can do those one-time backups as like a quick and dirty. The Windows backup has gotten better, but it's definitely not 100%. It just doesn't beat out things like DD and DC3DD, who capture the entire disk, every bit. You can use volume shadow copy to make full volume backups. These work block by block. And actually, the server backup uses these to create the backup. You can choose what kind of, do you want it normal backup performance, faster, or be custom? VSS admin is the command line program to configure this service. So you can create and delete any shadow copies and list any copies that exist. So if a volume gets corrupted for some reason, you can restore it back with the volume shadow copy. Most roles can be backed up during the usual server backup. There are a few that are going to be a little different. So here are some PowerShell commands for Windows backup. And here's the WB admin. For recovery, the other side, Again, you want to test your backups. You want to test that they work. Don't just assume because it says successful that it will be, because like Ciarian just said, when he has tried to do backups on Windows 7, they fail 80% of the time. That's why you want to test. You don't want to make backups and assume that they're good, and then when disaster strikes, then realize that things didn't work. That's just bad news. So regularly test. If you have it a shadow copies enabled, regularly test that it works. If you're doing full backups, regularly test that they work. Perform system state recoveries. Do it on like a weekend when no one's there. Again, to ensure that everything is working. Because disaster will happen. It's not an if, it's always a when. You can do a authoritative restore, restoring the Active Directory and the domain controller. A non-authoritative, will have any changes made to the Active Directory objects since the last backup been kept on the server being restored, or you could do the system state, the bare metal, or full server. Now we can choose where we're going to recover a system state of Active Directory. Bare metal, which was mentioned before, is normally used to boot through a medium. So we use like an ISO file, or we use a USB disk, boot off of that, and then use the backup and restore to get our operating system back up and running from a backup. Now, while most of the services will get backed up and restored automatically, these three are a little more specific. Hyper-V, Active Directory, and IIS. Hyper-V has not only backing up the settings like the switches and configurations, it also has the actual backup of the virtual machines, especially if you don't have something like live migration. So a full server backup or a bare metal recovery of a Hyper-V host will have the role itself, its settings, and the virtual machines that were on it. Whereas a system state will not include the Hyper-V settings or the virtual machines. So when you set up your backup, you have to determine how much space do I have and what am I backing up. The VMs could be running or they could be shut down when this happens, and it'll record including any other snapshots or checkpoints like they call them. And you can use this to restore a VM or the Hyper-V settings back. And again, you want to test. You want to test to make sure that your backups work. We did talk about high availability last week. When talking about Active Directory, the two main folders that are precious to Active Directory are NTDS and sysvol, both located in the system root. They'll have these files. NTDS has these files, and sysvol having the group policy templates, any scripts, and synchronization data. Unless you install Active Directory in a different place, that's where you'll get it. So Active Directory will get backed up during a full backup, a backup of a volume, or a system state. When you need to restore Active Directory, you can do it non-authoritatively, restoring the AD database and allow data to be updated through a replication from another domain controller, or authoritative, where you restore, the restored objects are not overwritten by changes from other domain controllers. So if you do authoritative, you're saying this is the Active Directory that needs to get propagated out, versus non-authoritative is here's a backup now, let's update it from somebody else. Right, so non-authoritative can be done when the database is corrupt or when you're doing a full server recovery. Authoritative can be specific. If you do Active Directory as authoritative, then you should also do sysvol authoritatively as well. Does it have an option? Does Active Directory backup have an option like Windows 10 file history, where it makes a snapshot anytime something changes? You could do that to the files themselves, but Active Directory is a little finicky. So if you do a file history backup, be careful. The Active Directory is kind of sensitive, like Windows Registry, where if you make a false move, it'll crash. So if you need to back up or repair Active Directory, there is the option within the system configuration. If the recycle bin is on, you can restore deleted objects. But remember that the recycle bin in Active Directory is not enabled by default. And if you do enable it, the only way to turn it off afterwards is to redo all of Active Directory. Just kind of weird. Lastly, there's IIS, your web and application server role. If you want to back up the configuration files, it's all in inetserv, and you can use the app CMD to do so. Otherwise, if you have dynamic content, you would use a backup program to store that. So here's an example of using the app command to make a backup. And it'll be stored in that same folder, in that new folder called backup. So it's a weird backup because it's not really saving in a different folder or a different drive. It's still saving within itself. So this isn't necessarily useful if the drive dies. You know, this is where having a full backup would be useful, because if the drive itself goes bad, your data is still saved. But if you don't rely on that and you just use this backup, you're gonna have some problems.